The Beara Peninsula, with its rugged mountains and great natural beauty, juts out into the Atlantic Ocean in southwest Ireland. It is a place of colourful villages and a town where people enjoy a relaxed lifestyle. As in past centuries, the sea is still important in the lives of Beara people. Beara's charm attracts visitors from near and far. But it was not always so peaceful. Here at Dunboy, the ruins of O'Sullivan-Bere's castle are a stark reminder of tragic events over 400 years ago. Donald Combe O'Sullivan-Bere took part in the ill-fated Battle of Kinsale in December 1601, along with the northern chiefs Hugh O'Neill, Red Hugh O'Donnell, and Donegal, commander of the Spanish forces. After the battle, Hugh O'Neill appointed O'Sullivan-Bere commander of the remaining Irish forces in the south. Richard Tyrrell and his mercenary troops from Westmeath accompanied O'Sullivan on his return to Beara. Dunboy Castle, the home of the O'Sullivan-Bere chieftains, was built in the 15th century on this rocky headland overlooking Berehaven harbour. It was somewhat similar to the O'Sullivan Castle at Carriganas near Bantry. The entrance was here on the east side, and a stone stairs built into the wall led to the upper stories. The surrounding curtain wall was 16 feet high and had projecting corners called bastions, and it was built quite close to the castle itself. This narrow space proved to be a hindrance during the siege when the tower collapsed, because the rubble filled up this narrow area here, enabling Carew's troops to scramble in over the rubble and up onto the castle itself. On arriving at his castle in Dunboy after Kinsale, O'Sullivan-Bere had to overpower the Spanish garrison, which he allowed to occupy his castle during his absence. It was only a matter of time before the English forces, commanded by Sir George Carew, would seek to retake Dunboy Castle and break the power of O'Sullivan-Bere.
Carriganás Castle was built probably in about the year 1549, and it was built by Dermot of Foother, so called because he blew himself up with gunpowder. It was a fortified house on the east side of the O'Sullivan-Bere territory, so that the purpose of it was purely territorial defence. From about the year 1560, there had been an ongoing dispute within the O'Sullivan family, and this resulted in a division of the O'Sullivan-Bere lands, with Owen O'Sullivan getting the eastern part of the O'Sullivan-Bere territory. After the Battle of Kinsale, Donald Combe attacked this castle, and he took as prisoner Owen O'Sullivan's wife, and he took her to Beara and eventually to Dursey. Owen O'Sullivan then joined up with the forces of Carew and took part in the Siege of Dunboy, and also took part in the rescue of his wife from Dursey Island.
On April the 20th, Carew and his army left from Cork, and they came down along the coast, Timoleague, Rosscarbery, Castlehaven, Baltimore, and causing havoc everywhere they came, killing very many people. And April the 30th, they arrived here at Dunboy. The plan was to rest the troops here for a month until they got back full energy again, and then to attack Dunboy via Glengariff and Adrigole. While they were here, they sent out scouts to reconnoitre the ground between here and Castletown, and found it very difficult. And another problem they had while this was going on, Wilmot, one of Carew's generals, was heading this way from the Kerry direction with a large number of troops, and Tyrrell, one of Donald Combe's accomplices, went out with his men and harassed them on the Cork-Kerry mountains, preventing him from coming over and joining Carew here. But Wilmot eventually made an overnight march across Mangerton Mountain and onto Inchigeela into Bantry, a very circuitous route, and he joined up with Carew here in this area. They rested here for roughly a month. While they were here, they raided the countryside for miles around, stealing cattle and sheep and pigs and what food could be got to feed the military here. During the month that Carew was here, Donald Combe and Tyrrell on numerous occasions harassed Carew's troops and did all their power to prevent them from going along the mountains of the Caha to get to Castletown. When Carew and his generals had decided that the best way to transport the troops to Dunboy was by boat, he immediately ordered ships which were lying in wait in Cork to come to Bantry Bay. On the last day of April, then they had a council of war and decided that they could not get to Castletownbere and Dunboy via the pathways on the mountains, and they decided to go along the south shore of Bantry Bay and to ship the army and equipment across the bay to Bear Island.
When George Carew arrived here from Bantry, he set up camp on this headland called Keelavanogue in the Wintervara Peninsula. It looks out over Bantry Bay and the Beara Peninsula, west along to Bear Island. The next day, the 1st of June 1602, boats, large and small, ferried regiments of the Earl of Thomond and Sir Richard Wilmot across Bantry Bay to Bear Island. The following day, the regiment of Sir George Carew and Richard Perry were taken across.
The ships and boats carrying Carew's army came in and landed at this calm and sheltered harbour at Lonert in the southeast end of Bear Island. The largest of the ships was a ship named the Trinity from Waterford. She had to tow the hoy up Bantry Bay against the wind, and the Trinity herself tied up at this rock here known as Scott. It took 2 days to complete the landing of over 4,000 troops and some of their cannon. And they had to make a road, rough road, straight west through the island. This old road which Carew made is known as on Moor. You can see here where they cut through the rock to make it easier to haul their cannons west to the campsite. The main camp was here in Ballinakillen, northeast of Ballinakillen School.
Across the harbour on the mainland, O'Sullivan Bear and Richard Tyrrell were keeping a close eye on the movements of Carew's troops on Bear Island. Richard McGagan, the commander at Dunboy Castle, and his men had been strengthening the castle defences for weeks and weeks beforehand. They added a bank of earth and wood 20 feet thick outside the high stone wall, and they placed cannons on the bastions at each corner. They placed smaller cannon on the tower and on the castle itself.
Soon after, the Earl of Thomond met with Richard McGagan, who was the commander of the defenders of Dunboy Castle at the west end of Bear Island. He tried to persuade him to surrender the castle. McGagan refused, as he gave his allegiance to O'Sullivan Bear. The people of the island were terrified as Carew's troops roamed the island, rounding up all the cattle they could find to feed their army. While they were on Bear Island, some of Carew's troops died, and they're buried here in this field. These stones mark their graves. On the morning of the 6th of June, Carew himself went out in the pinnace named the Merlin to find a suitable landing place on the mainland or on Danish Island. He saw that Danish was undefended. He commandeered all the boats he could find on the island and transported his own regiment and the Earl of Thomond's regiment out to Danish Island.
When I was about 10 years old, I walked along the shore here one evening and I spotted some iron in the bank, and I rooted around it and I found the ball, the cannonball. Most likely the cannonball came from Carew's guns, which were across the way in Danish Island, which is not too far away on the high ground.
Carew ordered his troops to the west side of Danish Island and mounted small cannons on the high ground. Across the narrow stretch of sea, he saw that the Irish had fortifications at Sandy Bay, where they expected him to attempt a landing. O'Sullivan, Bere and Tyrrell brought in extra troops to defend this area. Meanwhile, out of view of Sandy Bay, Wilmot and Percy's regiments forced a landing on the mainland near Danish Island. Carew then ferried his own troops onto the mainland near Danish Bridge. The Irish troops rushed around the coastline, but were too late to stop the landing. A bitter fight with small cannons, muskets and pikes followed. Superior numbers pushed the Irish into the nearby boggy woodland, where they took cover. Later that evening, Carew's army camped near Castletownbere. That same day, news of the arrival of a Spanish ship at Ardee was a boost for the morale of the Irish and a worry for Carew. On reaching Ardee that evening, O'Sullivan Bere discovered that money, munitions and supplies for his troops were on board the ship, as well as news that more Spanish help would arrive shortly. The next day, the 7th of June, the English army set up camp at Drown Wood opposite Dunboy and within cannon shot of the castle. The siege was now underway. However, the castle defenders and Tyrrell's troops made life difficult for the Crown forces as they continued to harass and attack the camp. Because of this, Carew set up a fortified camp in a sheltered hollow nearer but out of view of the castle. The Irish defenders in the castle fired cannon shot into the camp and made several sallies out of the castle. Tyrrell's troops continued attacking the camp, especially at night. A cable car links Dursey Island to the mainland. This deep ravine separates Dursey Island from Ilan Biog, or Small Island, which was once a stronghold of O'Sullivan Bere. Here are the stone steps that led down to the drawbridge, which once linked the two islands.
It was on the 12th of June, during the height of the siege in Dunboy, that Carew decided he would make an advance on Dursey Island. Carew appointed Captain Bostock and Lieutenant Downey to come around on the 13th of June with the main warship they had, the Merlin, and 4 large rowing boats they had commandeered locally. And accompanying them was Owen O'Sullivan, whose wife was interred here in the castle. They came around the Crow Head and landed some of their forces in under the Kilmichael shore in the middle of Dursey. And the main force stayed on the boat out at sea. And Lieutenant Downey was positioned in the old monastery, which even at that stage was a ruin, that as cover for his men while waiting for the signal to come out and attack across the drawbridge position and up along the front of the island. Bostock then gave the signal, and his men came ashore from the seaward side of the island and advanced up and rushed up onto the main front wall, which they took at the first rush. The 3 Spanish cannons that were on the island were in that area there, and they were taken immediately. The 40 O'Driscoll defenders, the O'Driscolls were being allies of the O'Sullivans, were defending this castle at the time. They fell back on a secondary position inside, and they're defended for about 2 more hours. But seeing they had no cannon to defend, and the English obviously having much more superior numbers, they surrendered themselves. When the castle was retaken, Owen's wife was within it then and got reunited at that stage. The defenders were then rounded up with all the other people in the island and marched off to their death on the cliffs. It's in this area, just to the right of the cable car structures, all the residents and garrison of Dursey were rounded up. In Don Philip's own words, the English, after their wanton manner, committed a crime far more notable for its cruelty than its honour. Having dismantled the fort and fired the church and houses, they shot down, hacked with swords, or ran through with spears the now disarmed garrison and others, old men, women and children, whom they had driven into one heap. Some ran their swords up to the hilt through the babe and mother, who was carrying it at her breast. Others paraded before their comrades' little children, writhing and convulsed on their spears. And finally, binding all the survivors, they threw them into the sea over jagged and sharp rocks, showering them with shot and stone. In this way perished over 300 Catholics.
In the meantime, Carew unloaded 4 large siege cannons and ammunition from the English ships in the harbour. And under constant fire from the castle, managed to bring them ashore at the head of Dunboy Creek. With great difficulty, the huge 2-ton cannons were hauled into position on a rocky outcrop 140 yards southwest of the castle. There was an eerie silence in the air as the sun rose over Bantry Bay on the 17th of June. Soon this silence was shattered as the boom of cannons echoed through the valleys and mountains of Beara. A full-scale attack was underway. Cannon shot from the castle rained on the English gun positions as Carew concentrated his heavy cannons on the tower of the castle. By 9 a.m, the tower and the cannon which was on top came crashing down, killing some of the defenders. Carew then concentrated his fire on the west wall of the castle above the earthen fortifications, and this was breached by 1 o'clock. Part of the wall came tumbling down, killing some of the Irish and partially blocking the narrow space between the castle and the surrounding wall. The Irish offered to surrender with honour. Carew's reply was to hang the messenger. He then ordered an assault on the castle. His troops suffered heavy losses as they tried to climb over the earthworks, and they were repeatedly driven back by musket, cannon shot and pike. Carew continued to send in fresh troops. All through the afternoon, fierce hand-to-hand fighting took place around the castle, with many more killed and wounded on both sides. 40 of the defenders rushed down to the sea to the east of the castle. 32 were shot down before they reached the sea. The remaining 8 tried to swim across to Bere Island, but they were killed in the water. Most of the remaining Irish were wounded, including McGeoghegan, but they continued to hold out on the ground floor under the great stone vault. At last, darkness fell, and the fighting stopped for the night. Next morning, the remaining Irish troops were forced to surrender. The dying McGeoghegan attempted to throw a lighting torch into a barrel of gunpowder to blow up the castle as the Crown forces were swarming in. He was killed before he could reach the gunpowder. Shortly afterwards, 58 of the Irish were hanged in the English camp. The Jesuit Brother Dominic Collins was later executed in Youghal, leaving no survivors from the 143 brave defenders. Don Philip O'Sullivan says that Carew lost up to 600 men. Carew paid a grudging tribute to the Irish defenders when he wrote,
"So obstinate and resolved a defence had not been seen within this kingdom."
2 days later, Carew ordered that the remains of the castle be blown up, leaving us these ruins to remind us of a dramatic and turbulent period in our history. Soon after, Carew's troops left by sea. In the months that followed, Donald Cowan and Richard Tyrrell held out, expecting the promised Spanish help. With their forces, they tried to raise a rebellion with some of the Irish chiefs in mid-Cork, but had only limited success. Gradually, the Crown forces were closing in. Many of O'Sullivan's mercenaries, including Tyrrell, had left. By December, Donald Cowan and his followers were holding out in this beautiful but remote valley of Comercawn, deep in the mountains to the west of Glengariff. They lived in makeshift shelters among the rocks. Food was scarce. Hope of Spanish help was fading. The English forces under Wilmot were closing in from the north. On the last day of December 1602, Donald Cowan O'Sullivan Bere led 1,000 of his people out of this valley on a 200-mile journey to their nearest ally, O'Rourke in Leitrim. 2 weeks later, only 35 people arrived at O'Rourke's castle.